And again, this will be available until March 20th for you to access on YouTube. Sure, we are recording. Great. So I'm going to stop sharing now and let Gabrielle share her screen for her presentation.
All right.
And while she's doing that, I'll give you a brief introduction, but I'll let her introduce herself a little also. Gabrielle Mack is an occupational therapist. She currently works in the St. Louis region. She's currently a full-time occupational therapist at Melanphy School, but she's worked all over. She has done a lot with Gateway Greenian, so I'll let her give a little more information about herself and start her presentation as she's ready.
Great. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. And I'm really, really happy to be here this evening with you. As Tanya said, I'm an occupational therapist, and I currently work with children, and a little bit of serendipity is that I work in a Gateway Greening garden school, which has been a lot of fun. And so I chose this topic to present because nature's always been a really big part of my life. And as an occupational therapist, I'm always very interested in finding activities that are meaningful to people to help them grow. And so it was not a big leap for me to connect my love of nature and gardening with my desire to, help engage people in, like I said, meaningful activities. So I'd like to share with you this evening some of the sensory and motor benefits of getting kids involved in school gardening or gardening in general. So I'm not going to include like every benefit because there's so many that I'm sure that you guys are already aware of, so many already. But what I decided to do was to include what I think of as like foundational motor and sensory benefits. And I think that these are things that are maybe less well known as well. So hopefully you'll learn a lot. Okay, so let's get started. So what's happened over the past few generations is that kids' leisure activities have moved from being movement-based and outdoor-based to indoor sedentary activities that are more technology-based. Whoops, excuse me. I'm trying to move myself out of the screen, but anyway, maybe I won't try to do that. So the thing about this is that humans are designed, our body's actually designed for movement. And when we don't move, our body doesn't like it that much and shows us in various ways. The other thing is that we are designed as humans to thrive in nature. And so this change in lifestyle in the last few generations to something more sedentary is in stark contrast to the way things were back in pioneer days. So if you think back several generations, daily life required lots of movement and lots of access to nature. And so if you think about people were getting up in the morning, they were milking the cows, they were cutting firewood, they were hauling, buckets of seed or grain and so forth to feed animals. So doing things that were really a lot of work and in contact with nature. And so movement and nature really helps the nervous system function optimally. And so it's really important for us at all times, but especially when we're developing. So as a result of the change away from these naturally occurring movement and nature opportunities to something more sedentary, is that the nervous system can suffer. And so kids may find it more difficult to regulate their emotions and their behavior because they're not getting those regularly, naturally occurring opportunities to work things out and to kind of organize their nervous system. And so what you might see sometimes is that maybe a kid is more prone to meltdowns or tantrums, or perhaps a kid just kind of withdraws and, gets depressed. So my premise for, this whole talk this evening is that getting kids gardening has a lot of benefits because just by nature of the activity, they are tapping into that movement and connection with nature. Okay, so let's start by talking about just some of the regular sensory systems that we're used to. We all learn about, hearing and sight and smelling and taste and touch. Those are our basic sensory systems. But I'm going to add a few more, that really help the nervous system function well. And those systems are called the vestibular system, the proprioceptive sensory system, and then also the tactile system, which is touch, which we had in the previous slide. So I'll go into those in more detail, but what I wanted to just say up front is that these three sensory systems are the foundation for optimal nervous system functioning. So the vestibular and the proprioceptive systems, they use large muscle activity. And by using our large muscles, we promote core strength. That can become a foundation for using our hands in fine motor coordination. Can also become a good stability place for the brain to process visual information. If we have a real stable core, we can use our eyes more effectively. And these sensory systems, when they're properly stimulated, one of the great things that they do is they get both sides of the brain talking. So there's a right and left hemisphere in our brain, and there's sort of a bridge down the middle when we're born. And as we develop, more and more input helps the two sides of the brain talk together. And that's what develops our brain and our nervous system more fully. So to show that, I have something called a learning pyramid. And if you look at the bottom, you will see the tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems. So that forms the base or the foundation of a well-functioning nervous system. So if these three systems are well developed, then everything sort of up the chain is going to fall into place. So you're going to have postural security. You're going to be able to screen out distractions and focus better, have better attention. You're going to have better language skills. And then ultimately at the top of the pyramid is academic learning. So if all of these things below in the pyramid are kind of sharpened and honed and functioning well, that's going to put a kid in a really good position to focus and learn academically. The other side of that is that if these sensory systems in the foundation of our pyramid are not functioning well, things above the chain are not going to perhaps work as well either. So let's talk first about our vestibular system. This is the system that gives us our sense of balance. And the way it works is that there's receptors in our inner ears. When we move our head, those receptors in our inner ear are stimulated and it sends information right to the brain and it says, oh, the head is down, the head is to the side, the head is up. And it gives the brain information about where we are. And so this helps us to learn to move without fear because our brain knows where we're going. And it helps coordination. And I hope you guys can see this little, this bird. I have a little songbird here in the corner. And the reason I have that is because the movement or vestibular information goes through our inner ear. That's the same pathways, nervous system pathways that sound goes through. So if you think about nature sounds are very calming. You know, the breeze in the trees, the birds chirping. And so that helps take us out of fight or flight responses, helps to calm our nervous system. And since those two signals travel in the same pathway to the brain, when you combine calming nature sounds with movement, it's an even better stimulation to the brain and to the vestibular system. Okay, so here's some examples of ways that getting out in the garden can stimulate your vestibular system. So anything that moves the head around. So here you see kids bending over, to weed or to plant seeds, bending over to dig. there's probably a lot of up and down movement. You know, you're standing up, you're bending down, you're putting something in the hole. So those are some really good ways to get some good vestibular input. You know, especially if you think about, you know, kids that are otherwise spending a lot of time playing Fortnite or whatever it is that they play now. So another thing that I wanted to mention was that when a developing kid moves their head, the eyes have to come along. They just do. They're attached. And so the more vestibular stimulation through head movement and movement in general, the stronger the eye muscles are going to be, which is really very important for kids, for the vision system. And so speaking of vision, I wanted to put this in here. I think this is so interesting. I learned this as I was researching some of the information for the talk. So being outdoors forces us to use our distance vision and also our peripheral vision. That happens to be the part of the visual system that develops first. It's supposed to develop first before the part of the visual system that's going to be focusing on near work or looking at something close to your face, or even pen and paper work. So by getting kids outdoors early on, you are helping to facilitate growth of the part of the visual system that is supposed to be developing, as opposed to 3-year-olds or something being on a screen and doing a lot of close-up work. The eyes are not ready for that yet. And if a developing visual system gets too much close-up work, it stretches the eyeball. Stretching the eyeball when it's not ready to be stretched is one thing that may lead to myopia or nearsightedness. So I think that's a really good case for spending more time outside using your distance vision rather than doing close-up things. The other thing I found that was so cool is that sunlight slows the stretching of the eyeball. I just thought that was fascinating. And so the eyeball that stretches too fast, that's going to be, you know, problems with nearsightedness, and sunlight actually slows that. So sun is good for so many things. Okay, so we're going to move out of the vestibular system, and now we're going to talk about the proprioceptive sensory system, or our sense of proprioception. So in all of our muscles and joints, everywhere in our body, there are little receptors that respond when there's any resistance on our muscles. So if you think about this woman, you know, holding a barbell, lots of resistance on a muscle and a joint. And so those receptors send a signal right up to the brain that says, here's where the arms are. Here's what they're doing. So eventually that helps to build a map within our brain of where all of our body parts are. And that is so important because kids that don't have a really good sense of where their body parts are going to have a hard time being coordinated and knowing how to use those body parts and move them. So for example, you guys are sitting there this evening, maybe you're sitting at a table, you can't see your feet or the position that your legs are in, but you can kind of tell, you know, because you have that body map in your brain, and that comes from this sense of proprioception. And so I have the term heavy work because, like in the therapy world, proprioceptive input is considered heavy work, and that's what can be really calming and organizing to the nervous system. So if something's organizing to the nervous system, it gives it what it wants and it helps it feel better. That's a good thing. So here's some examples of heavy work in the garden. You have kids, you know, feeding, well, that's maybe not a garden activity, but you get the point of a nature-based activity. Feeding animals, carrying produce or whatever they're harvesting, carrying bags of soil, bags of compost, shoveling compost or whatever, digging in the dirt. These are all really, really, really good activities to help organize the nervous system. They're doing what we're designed for. And that's why they're all smiling. Okay, so the last of those 3 foundational systems that I want to talk about is the tactile system. That is our sense of touch. It's our skin. If you think about it, our skin is the largest organ in our body. And so it turns out that our nervous system really likes for us to get dirty when we're little and we're developing. It needs that. So getting kids, literally getting their hands in the dirt, getting their feet in the mud, really good stuff. Maybe that's partly why kids like to play in mud puddles. It's also why, kids need to get dirty when they're feeding. I know this is a little bit off topic, but just to show the point. Kids need a lot of stimulation to their skin. If they get it, then that system develops very well. If they don't get it, if they don't get sufficient stimulation to their tactile system or sufficient hands in the dirt, they might develop what's called a tactile sensitivity, which means, they don't like the way things feel on them, or they don't like people touching them. They don't want a hug or something. It hurts. So I have this picture down here of the crocodile. What is just a normal sock on a person's foot, if they have a tactile sensitivity, might feel like, something much more abrasive than a sock. So that's the end of those three foundational nervous systems. And so now let's talk just for a minute about what happens if those foundational systems are not given the input that they're seeking as we're developing, and that they don't really form as well as they need to. That can result in some sensory sensitivities. And if that's really to an extreme, it can be to the extent of something called a sensory processing disorder, which is actually a diagnosable condition. It doesn't mean that every kid or every person with a sensory difference or sensory sensitivity has an actual disorder, but a lot of kids really do. And so those might be the kids in school who have like an IEP, or kids that are, getting therapy for some reason. But there's an awful lot of kids and people in general who have sensory issues that make certain things difficult for them that, maybe it's not identified and they don't really have any special interventions. So, so basically what happens is, in this situation, is that the nervous system the brain is not able to make sense of all the input coming in. So there's sounds, and there's bright lights, and there's people touching you, and you're moving, and you don't know where your body, in what way your body's moving. You can't catch your balance. And so makes it really hard for people that experience this. And so you might, if you're experiencing this, you can get into a state of dysregulation where you just don't feel right and you don't know how to make yourself feel right. And so, like I said, a lot of kids can be diagnosed with this, but a lot are undiagnosed and they go under the radar, and maybe they just, have some social, emotional, or regulation issues. And so my point is that, gardening is an activity that's going to help kids move from a dysregulated state to a more regulated state. And so kids who have sensory issues can show some of these characteristics. They may be clumsy. Like I said, if you don't have a good idea of where your body parts are, you don't have that brain map, it's going to be hard to move your body and not knock things over or spill the milk or bump into people. It can affect a person's attention and focus. And so maybe, somebody's reading instructions to you and you don't really remember what they said. Oh, gee, how do I do this now? It can actually manifest in something like eating problems, sleeping problems, anxiety, aggression, impaired language development, and of course, emotional regulation. So it doesn't mean if a kid shows a few of these characteristics that they necessarily have a sensory processing problem. But if a kid does have sensory issues, you probably will see some of these things. And like I said before, a lot of these kids might be under the radar. They don't have an identified problem, so they're not getting specific treatment. So So they're probably not thriving. You know, they're getting up and they're coming to school or doing whatever, but maybe they're not thriving. And so again, just adding something to their day or their curriculum that's going to provide their nervous system with stuff that it needs can be really helpful. And same with trauma. I can't, talk much on this because this is a topic unto itself, but just as kids may be diagnosed or undiagnosed with sensory problems, kids may have an identified trauma experience for which they're getting counseling or getting some help, or it might not be identified with anyone because the kid's not saying anything. And so again, there's kids, just in the general population who are having a lot of difficulties, and gardening is a way that can bring a little regulation to their nervous system. So the situation with trauma is that it can affect development negatively because it changes the brain architecture. So there is a part of our brain called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is the part of the brain where learning can take place, attention and focus and memories. And so when a kid experiences prolonged emotional dysregulation from trauma experiences, that part of the brain shrinks. Well, that is not a part of the brain that we want to shrink. It's very helpful. The other thing that happens with trauma, another part of the brain that's affected is called the amygdala. The amygdala is the alarm bell for the brain. It's like the fire alarm going off, and it's it's the fight or flight. Do something quick, you're going to be hurt. It puts us in a state of hypervigilance. And so unfortunately, with the changes that come with trauma, the amygdala grows bigger. Again, that's not what we want to happen. We want the opposite. We want the amygdala to shrink. We want the hippocampus to grow. So outdoor movement activities in the form of gardening, for example, many others as well, can help bring some regulation to the nervous system, a state of a little bit greater regulation to the child. Okay. All right, so now we can move into some research articles. I have about 5 research articles that I want to go over. And the first one is entitled Sensory Processing Difficulties, Behavior Problems, and Parental Stress. So we talked a lot about sensory processing difficulties and actual sensory processing disorders a minute ago. What this study did is it surveyed, well, first of all, it showed a connection between the extent of a kid's sensory processing difficulties and parental stress. So they interviewed 59 parents of some preschoolers who had social emotional disorders. And so what they did is they measured the sensory differences in the kids with a sensory tool. They had the parents rate the children's behavior issues, and then they had the parents rate their own stress, the parental stress. And so what they found was that as the sensory processing difficulties increased, the kids that had more and more, as they had more and more sensory issues, the parents of those kids, their stress increased as well. So there was a relationship between how much sensory difficulty my kid has and how high my stress is. And so we've just spent some time talking about how something like a movement, nature-based activity can help bring more regulation to these kids with sensory differences. And so I think this is a great marketing tool, to say to parents, look, we're doing a program that's helping kids' nervous systems feel better, basically. And this study shows that that's going to make your stress better and make your nervous system feel better. So I thought that was very interesting. The study is entitled Horticulture-Related Activity Significantly Decreases Stress and Salivary Cortisol in Maladjusted School Children. This was a small study. There were just 10 kids in the experimental group and 10 controls, but I thought it was really interesting and worth mentioning. And so they were looking at kids who had experiences with school underachievement, school violence. They're experiencing depression, issues like media addiction. So kids that were having some difficulties. So what they did is they put these kids in a 9-week program of different horticulture-related activities. One of them was flower arranging, one was planting activities, and one was flower pressing. And so what they did, they took measurements before and after those 9-week horticulture programs. One of the things they did is they took a saliva sample and measured the level of cortisol in the kids' saliva. Cortisol is a stress hormone. And so the more cortisol we have in our bloodstream at any given time, the higher our stress is. Or the higher our stress is, the more cortisol we have floating around in our bodies. The other thing that they did is they had the kids fill out a perceived stress scale. And so that scale was asking kids like, how are your interpersonal relationships? How are you feeling about school life, personal problems, and home life? Okay, so that was pre and post. So at the end of the 9 weeks, the post treatment salivary cortisol levels decreased 37% compared to where the kids were beforehand. And so basically what that means is that after participating in these regular horticulture activities, the kids had greater than 1/3 fewer stress hormones floating around in their body. And so if somebody could come to you and say, hey, I'd like to take out 1/3 of the stress hormones that you're feeling right now, I think we'd all be like, please, please do it now. So that was an important finding. The other finding was that these stress scales that the kids filled out, the scores on all the items decreased, but it showed a significant decrease in the kids' school life stress compared with the control groups. So that's it's always a good thing when a kid feels less stress at school. Okay, before the next study, I want to just spend a second talking about attention restoration theory. And this was a theory that was developed by a husband and wife psychologist team, the Kaplans, back in the 80s. And what they found was that the more we concentrate and focus on something, we're working really hard, we're doing homework or whatever, we can get really fatigued. And if we don't give ourselves a rest and we continue to fatigue ourselves mentally, we can begin to show symptoms similar to someone who experiences ADHD. So even if we don't have ADHD, but we're mentally fatigued, we can show impaired focus and we can show increased impulsivity. And so what the Kaplans found was that natural environments help us recover from this mental fatigue, and they help mitigate those symptoms of impulsivity and impaired attention that the fatigue brought on. So it can really restore us. So that's very good news. Okay, so this study was called a potential natural treatment for ADHD. And so what this study did is it looked at the effect of different after school and weekend activities on kids who had ADHD. So they surveyed over 450 parents of children who had ADHD. And they asked the parents, what do these different activities, what are the after effects on your kids' ADHD symptoms of these various different activities? And so the symptoms that they were asking the parents to rate was the kids' ability to focus on a non-preferred task, their ability to listen and follow directions, and their ability to resist distractions. And so they just compiled all the various activities that these children were engaged in after school or on weekends, and they categorized them into 3 categories. One category was activities that were done outside in the outdoors in green space. So like something like a park, the woods, something like that. So they called those green outdoor activities. Then there were other activities that they found the kids were doing indoors. Those were the indoor activities. And then the third category that they found was what they called built outdoor activities. So this might be things like, just kids hanging out in the street, hanging out on the corner, or playing basketball in a parking lot or something like that. So they're outside, but it's kind of a concrete setting. So what they found when the parents rated the kid, the after effects, like in the hour or so after these particular activities, is that the green outdoor activities showed a significant decrease in the kids' ADHD symptoms compared with indoor activities or the built outdoor spaces. And so that held true whether the child had mild or severe ADHD symptoms, whether or not they had a learning disability, whether or not they had something, like an oppositional defiant disorder. The kids all showed significantly less ADHD symptoms after the green outdoor activities. And so what they proposed, the authors, is they called this a green dose. And they even, surmised, like, wouldn't it be great if doctors could write on a prescription pad, spend this amount of time in the park, go out in the woods or whatever. And that, they even surmised that possibly, in some cases that might, allow kids to maybe take less of a dose of their medicine, or a lot of kids with ADHD maybe can't tolerate medication. So this, I think, was really, really, really cool. Like, there's no downside to this. They're already doing these things. So just add in more of those green outdoor activities for them. Okay. The last study is called Regular Doses of Nature, the Efficacy of Green Exercise Interventions for Mental Well-Being. This was a study that was done in the United Kingdom with 318 participants. And so these were people just in the general population, but also people who are receiving, I think, outpatient treatment it was for some mental health difficulties. It also included some youth, some kids. And so some of the mental health issues that some of the youth were experiencing were things like abuse, addiction, poverty, school failure. There were even some kids in the study with learning disabilities, with autism. They even had some homeless children in. I don't know how many. I don't think very many. But anyway, it was very interesting mix. And as I said, a lot of people just in the general population as well. So what they did is they had everyone fill out a mental well-being assessment before and after these green exercise activities. And the green exercise activities were things like community gardening activities or conservation activities. One of the groups was a tree planting activity. One of them did a nature craft. So it was just kind of a variety. It was 6 different nature activities, and they lasted between 12 and 26 weeks. So kind of nice long term. And so what they found was that at the end of these, several weeks of participating in these the horticulture programs, they found that all participants showed an improved well-being score. So that right there is great. I mean, even if there was nothing else, that's wonderful. But the icing on the cake is that the most improvement that was found was with the people who rated themselves as having the lowest well-being. So 61% of the people who rated themselves with the lowest well-being to begin with moved into the average to the high well-being group by the end. So more than 50% of these people who were really suffering with low mental well-being moved into the average to high well-being group. I just think that's fantastic. And the authors in the study were really excited about it as well. And they said this has great public health implications because, for goodness sakes, anyone, even if you already have good well-being, it's going to get better. And if you have, more importantly, if you have really low well-being, chances are good it's going to get better as well. So I pulled a quote from the study that I really liked. And they said, green exercise interventions can be used efficaciously to achieve well-being improvements for a range of different cohorts. Indeed, an implication of these findings is that green exercise interventions should be considered as a therapeutic approach for well-being for both the general population and vulnerable cohorts. So with that, we see that research has showed us that we are indeed wired for movement and for nature. And so that just like with our learning pyramid, we can see that gardening activities can help kids build that resilience in their nervous system that they're going to need for mastery in other activities in life. So I hope you all have an opportunity to help influence a child to get outside and move in some way or another. So I am going to stop my screen share. And I am here now.
Great. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. That was a wonderful presentation. I've seen a few comments come up, and we'll share those before we end. But if anyone else has any other thoughts, comments, or questions that they would like Gabrielle to address, then please put them in the Q&A box or chat, and we will get to those before we end. So I noticed one attendee, Melinda, had asked, she said she has had a chance to visit a juvenile detention center a couple of years ago, and what hit her the most was that kids did not have access to the outdoors, let alone a garden. Do you know of any organization or group of experts that work to improve juvenile detention facilities to mandate outdoor experiences or connections to nature and gardening? And that's a great question, Melinda. I'm not sure where you are. If you want to drop in the chat or Q&A where you're located. I don't know if you're local here in St. Louis. I know this is a topic that we've talked about at Gateway Greening many times. There are some really great groups that work with, I know I've read a lot of studies with different prisons and the effects that, I know California has some really great organizations, Planting Justice and Insight Gardening, the Insight Gardening Project or program, I believe. They do a lot with different California prisons, and the effects are amazing, giving these people that experience outdoors and the ability to kind of nurture life. But as far as juvenile detention centers, I'm not sure around here. Do you know anything about that, Gabrielle? Do you have any?
I don't, but I think that's an excellent question. And that is a really interesting topic. I'd love to look into that.
So it looks like Melinda said she's in Columbia. I'm guessing Columbia, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely something we will look into. And we have your email. So if something comes up, we'll be happy to share that with you, Melinda. But yeah, it's definitely something that we need to see more of.
Absolutely.
So Melinda also said, when you were talking about the cortisol levels and how it affects that, she said for just 40 minutes per week, do you think cortisol levels would drop even more with multiple times per week or more minutes per week?
I mean, I guess there's potential. It is a stress hormone. And so the less stress that we experience, the less we're going to have cortisol. So, yeah, I mean, I think it kind of stands to reason. I'm not a scientist. I haven't studied that specifically, but I think you can kind of draw that conclusion. Mm-hmm. More is better. Yeah.
Susan Kennedy, I see, asked if we know of any green preschool or kindergarten programs in the St. Louis area. So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by green, but there are definitely some schools that are kind of nature-based. There's Raintree School I know of, who has kind of a forest nature-based approach. There are quite a few. So I don't know, Gabrielle, do you want to speak on that at all?
Yeah, I know that the Ethical Society nursery school program, which is a preschool, has a lot of, I don't know if it's not entirely outdoor based, but they do access the outdoors quite a bit, and they have some woods there. So that's another one.
Yeah, there are definitely quite a few. I'd be interested, Susan, to know if you're looking at a specific area in this city, and we could definitely connect you with that. I know we have about 80 youth gardens in our network at Gateway Greening, so we could definitely give you a little more insight into that if you're looking in a specific area in the region, the city or county. Let's see, Dominique asked if it's possible to get the PowerPoint or the reference research articles. So again, if you joined a little late, this presentation will be shared It will be up on our YouTube page in a day or two, and it will be available through March 20th. And we can definitely send out to attendees if you're interested. We can definitely send out her presentation. And I believe you had all the references at the end of the presentation. Yeah, we can definitely send that out. Let's see, Shrai, hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Shah said, what is the best way to get teens outdoors? What programs are available in St. Louis? So many. Are there any particular programs that you want to share, Gabrielle?
So I know that there's like a ropes course at Creve Park, and I think that's geared towards teens. It's I think the name of the organization is called Go Ape, is the name of the, it's like a outdoor tree-based kind of activity. I don't think I know of any others off the top of my head.
So there are quite a few, and I'd be happy try to send you a list of more references for that if you work with outdoor youth. But so like Forest Park Forever has a great program. They also have an outdoor kind of like playscape that they just launched, which is great for field trips. You know, right now it's hard to say as far as what everyone is allowing and doing, but Green Teen Alliance, there are so many groups that I don't want to take up all the time sharing those, but I would be happy to send you a list with quite a few. I don't know if you're a teacher and you're looking for like outdoor field trip opportunities, but I can definitely connect with you and share quite a few of those. And I can send those out to the whole group if you're all interested. Jennifer Hartley asked, what about students who are in middle school or higher? If they have poorly developed sensory systems, does this kind of activity help them to recover? That's a good question.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's good for anyone. It's, yes. Right.
I think even as adults.
Oh yeah, totally.
There's definitely therapeutic benefits in getting outside and gardening. Susan asked, does Gateway Greenian have plans to do a therapeutic program such as the one done at the Farm of St. Patrick's Center? She's in the Dogtown area. So we don't have a plan right now, but it's definitely something we talk about pretty regularly, and we've talked with Gabrielle about. So I know she'll be using some of our beds at our demonstration garden this season and kind of playing around with that and thinking of some different ideas. And Gateway Greenian will be moving locations. Hopefully in fall, we will be at our new location at the Delmar Divine building. And it's definitely something that we've been thinking about at our new location, kind of incorporating into our programming. So stay tuned for that. But I'm glad you asked about that. We've also been looking at different ideas of different gardening infrastructure that is ADA friendly and, you know, works for these different therapeutic needs. So yeah, stay tuned. So let's see, I see that Melinda said she's a dietitian based in Columbia, Missouri. She's familiar with the prison and jail garden programs. There are way too few of these. We agree. She'd like to stay connected, so she dropped her email. So she also hosts a radio program, and she said she would love to interview you, Gabrielle, on this topic. So we'll be, along with the recording, we'll have all of the chat saved. So I'll definitely work to connect you all together. It's great. Thank you, Melinda.
Great.
Molly said taking hikes with her teen and preteens has been amazing. They fight it out. They fight it out the door, but once they get to their destination, everyone's happy and refreshed. Yeah. I think these days more than ever, right? It's really opening all of our eyes up to how great it is to get outside. And we finally, here in St. Louis anyway, if you're local, after last week, we're all needing that. What is the best way to get teens outdoors? Again, it really kind of depends on, I guess, they like that, you know, the thing about getting teens outdoors, it doesn't have to be somewhere out in the woods, somewhere far away from where you are. There are so many green spaces around, and right now there's a great group, a great collaborative in St. Louis that's really working to. It's involves a bunch of people that are involved in different outdoor ed organizations and groups, and we're all kind of working together to increase these green spaces and come up with lists that we can share with families as far as resources, places to go, and also different like curriculum resources. So stay tuned for that also, because this is a kind of a new project that I've been involved with, and there are a lot of great people that work with outdoor ed and programs in the city. So hopefully, yeah, we'll have that up and ready to share with the public before too long. So yeah, look for that. Any other comments or questions? I'm going to be mindful of everyone's time. We still have about 12 minutes left, but has anything else they want to share?
You know, I wanted to just mention one other thing in regards to the first question about the juvenile homes and having gardens in prison spaces and so forth. So many people in our prisons and juvenile detention centers are there because of sensory difficulties or changes, like I said, changes to the brain, architecture from trauma experiences. They really do not, their nervous systems are not fully developed. And so, you know, you can think of it as they don't have the higher brain functioning. The thinking brain is not as developed as it could be. And so perhaps those people are more prone to impulsivity and so forth. And so, you know, they end up in the legal system, unfortunately. But I think that something like a gardening or some sort of an outdoor activity is the best medicine, because it's going to help them. It's going to help them develop in ways that, you know, they hadn't. And then of course it's, you know, restorative as well from being in the legal system. But I just think it's so important. And I mean, that's just kind of a personal interest of mine, is at some point, you know, being able to educate our legal system about the fact that so many people, grown-ups and kids, just don't have the cognitive skills to steer them away from that. And so I really think that should be taken into consideration. So just a random thought.
Absolutely. So we're getting a lot of great feedback from this. Again, thank you so much, Gabrielle. I saw that Dominique had raised her hand. I'm not sure if you had a question. Again, since we're on webinar mode, I can't unmute any of you, but if you have a question, feel free to drop that in the box before we close out. We'll give you just a few minutes. Again, I will be sure to send out to participants Gabrielle's presentation. Again, the recording will be up. And I'll also, the references that, or resources I referenced as far as different St. Louis outdoor green groups, I'll be happy to send a list of those as well. Belinda Lane said, do you have resources for doing this with elders? It's a great question.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in horticulture therapy with elders. So yeah, I can provide you with some, Tanya, when you send information out. Yeah.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a couple of days and we will gather all these resources, and we'll go ahead and send them out to all the participants' emails. Ooh, I see a question that says, do indoor plants also provide the same benefits? You know I've seen, there's that study we all see that hospital beds just being near a window, you know, sometimes just having that, it's not necessarily that you have to be working in with plants, but just having that visual can definitely pick up moods and has a pretty profound effect. But yeah, I don't know if you have any experience with this. No, I think absolutely. I mean, they definitely, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree. Yeah, I think it absolutely has an effect. And in fact, I think it was in the teacher's presentation that we did in the fall. One of the teachers said that what she's been doing with her students that are virtual is she lives kind of rurally. She's been like taking her laptop outside while the kids are on the screens at home, and she's just kind of doing a walk around so that they can get a lot of nature sights. Yeah, that definitely impacts the brain positively.
I just noticed Melinda made a comment about the cost of a garden or outdoor activity versus the cost of a drug. So.
Yeah, no kidding. Right.
Let's see. Okay, so Dominique said she's an art therapist living in Tower Grove East, and she's looking into getting into private practice where she could incorporate gardening with clients. Awesome. She doesn't have a building or a space. She would ideally start with telehealth due to the pandemic. Would Gateway Greening ever allow a space for a neighborhood community garden plot to be used for this purpose? Absolutely. That's really what we do. So I'm going to take down your name and we can talk more in person about that. But if you, if there is a lot nearby that you could use for that, we can definitely guide you through that process. But I can also try to connect you with nearby community gardens that might have a plot near you that you could do that with. So I'm going to make a note of that and I'll connect with you separately. Thank you, Dominique. I'm happy to hear that. You're looking forward to doing that. Maybe you and Gabrielle can team up. Gabrielle, you're going to be so busy after this.
Good. That's great.
We have a few more minutes.
I mean, there's so many great art activities that you can do in a garden. I'm sure you know, Dominique, but yeah, that's so interesting to me.
Yeah, and in that area in particular, we actually have a few groups that have been working through our garden development process. So I would be happy to try to connect you with them also, Dominique. We will talk more. So Elizabeth just dropped in the Q&A natureexplore.org. They have a list of schools with outdoor classrooms.
Oh, cool.
Great, thank you for that resource. And I'll try to share as many of these resources that we've mentioned as I can in the next couple days. Let me send everything out. So we only have a few minutes left, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Again, Gabrielle, thank you so much for your time. Oh, hold on, I just got another question up. Let's see. Lauren is also an occupational therapist interested in volunteering to support development of opportunities in Gateway Greening Gardens. Awesome. Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. I will drop, you can contact us through education@gatewaygreening.org, but I'm going to go ahead and drop my personal email if you want to chat more about any opportunities that Gateway Greening can help with. You can always just find us by Googling us also. So again, thank you everyone for attending. This has been a fantastic session. Always love talking with Gabrielle. So we will send out those resources shortly in the future. And again, this presentation will be up until March 20th. So thank you everyone and have a great night. And thank you again, Gabrielle.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's glad to be here.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.